Hello again everyone, this is Stephen Gibson, and today is going to be another short tutorial, and the topic is creating a kind of grungy, scratched up metal that you see here on this frame. So if we zoom in here, you can see there's some nicks in it. It's a pretty common feature with things like Warcraft or more cartoony stuff. And then we've got a lot of scratches and some mud and dirt. We also have a gold trim. So I have this file here. It's my metal frame file. And you can see over I've got a bunch of layers. So if I turn these off, oops, start to see how I built this texture up. Alright. So basically what I did is I used the shape tool. Oops. Use the shape tool. I set the fill to gray. The fill doesn't matter. No stroke. Um, and for this the frame I made a custom shape so I could put in some rounded edges, but basically it was just a rectangle. And so what you do is you're going to double click that shape, and you're going to go to bevel and emboss, and for techniques you're going to go to chisel hard. You're going to increase the size to where you want it, and the depth is just going to make basically the shadows darker and the highlights brighter. Alright, and you'll see some of this like kind of notching on the side, and that's okay for metal because it kind of looks like how metal looks. But if you don't like that, you can soften it, but it's going to ruin your hard edge over here. So I just leave it. It's not a big deal. And then I usually put on either a drop shadow, depending on what I'm going for. And you'll see it looks like it's floating off of it. If you want to make it not look like it's floating, you can add an inner shadow, reduce the distance, or you can keep the distance where it is, but change where the shadow is happening. And it creates this kind of dark lip, and that kind of helps ground it a bit more, so it doesn't look like it's popping off so much. And then you can also add an outer glow. And the difference between outer glow and drop shadow is not really anything. Drop shadow's got this distance, so you can pull it away, whereas outer glow does not have a distance. So that's really the only difference. And I usually always set the blend mode to normal, but you might want to change that. Then I hit it over to dark, and then it's going to create this hard shadow all around it, so it kind of sinks it down so it doesn't look like it's floating. So you can see here floating, and then nice and looks like it's right on the ground there for the texture. And if you wanted a harder shadow, you can definitely do that depending on your lighting. A harder shadow is going to make it look a little closer to the object as well, right? But if you have like a really soft shadow, it kind of floats it. Because things further away from the object that they're casting the shadow on have softer shadows, depending on how hard the light is, of course, but that's typically how it goes. And then if you say you wanted like a gold trim or any other kind of trim, you would go to stroke, set it to inside, and then for Grimslingers I use a gold trim a lot of the time, and then I just pop it up. Sometimes I pop it right over the lip, helps it show a bit more. So that would be at 20. And the reason I pop it over the lip is it gives us this kind of highlight, so it helps you define the gold trim a bit more. Because you see if I pop it down to 19, you're not getting that nice highlighted lip anymore. Down here. Whoopsie. Yeah. And then that would be the base for your metal. So now we've got this nice gold button, well, gold trim button. And then here's, so that's all my layer styles. You can collapse those so they're not taking up all your layer space. And then excuse me for a second. I have this, I have a metal texture. I'm gonna pop it off of that real quick. So I just got this metal texture off of Google. Just Google metal texture. Found one that had a few scrapes, what I wanted. But there are all kinds of metal textures, and metal textures aren't that hard to create yourself. I'm just lazy, and we're going to be creating a more elaborate metal texture. So hold Alt and click in between the layers so that they're connected. Now it's going to confine this texture to this shape here, right? So now we got our metal texture on there. One other thing you can do to make the metal look a little more metally is add a gradient overlay. Set it to either multiply or overlay. Choose something dark, change the angle, reduce the opacity. That kind of creates, you can kind of make it look more like a button if you add a gradient overlay, or just add a little bit of shadow. I'm not going to right now because I want this surface to look really flat. So popped our metal texture on there. And then you can move that texture around to where it's in a spot that you like. So say I want some scratches. Yeah, like that. Nice and dirty. And you can always, if it gets blurry when you increase the scale, because maybe you need to increase the scale if you're working really hard, you can just always pop a sharpen on it. You can see it really, it's going to sharpen it a bit, which is nice. Especially if you're printing these cards, I think printers tend to, when cards get printed out, they tend to be a little more soft, not as crisp, because they're not, obviously not displaying thousands of pixels. So putting a sharpen on that can help crispen your image a bit for printing on cards or whatever it is. And alright, so we've got our sharpened. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some grunge to it. So I made a new layer, I attached it. Now I've got a bunch of custom grunge brushes. For those of you who don't know how to get custom brushes in Photoshop, I always recommend going to DeviantArt. Ignore the constant images of pornography and type in the top just grunge brush, and you'll come up with all these different grunge packs, or you can do dirt brush and you get all these nice dirty brushes. So those are a good way to go. I like to use like splatter brushes. It's kind of my style, so this is the one that I often use. So it's meant for blood or ink, but you can use it for anything. And then you would just download it, and when you do, you double click that ABR file and it automatically loads into your Photoshop in real time, and it'll pop up in your custom brushes. The hotkey is F5, or yeah, F5 for me right now. And it brings up your brush and your brush presets, and you get all these cool custom brushes. So I'm going to use some of my spatter brush. If I can just find it here real quick. Yeah. Alright. Whoopsie. Retouch that layer, turn that brush off, and then I'm going to set this layer to overlay, and I'm going to choose kind of a brownie color and just slap on some grunge. Yep. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity just so it's like it's there. You notice the grunge, and sometimes you can create multiple layers of grunge, different colors. So for this one, I'll do some black, and then I'll lower the opacity so gives it a little more. Gives it a little more. So I've got some grunge on it now. Now, if you want the grunge to apply to this gold trim as well, what you're gonna have to do is collapse your layer style. So you have to rasterize your layer. And oops, I have to rasterize my layer style. Hold on. Yeah. Then you would want to get this metal texture off of the gold trim. So what I did there was I rasterized my layer style and my shape, so it's just a rasterized layer, and then I selected the top part, and then I Control Shift I to select the inverse of that, so I'm selecting the gold trim now. Then I'm deleting deleting the metal texture off of that gold trim. You can do it by hand as well if you want, but no need. You can also do stuff like select that piece in the center, and then you can do things like another technique, sorry, is instead of deleting the metal texture off, is you can set it to multiply or overlay, but it's not going to be as clean effect. But say overlay gives you a pretty good thing, but you don't want this metal texture to be, because it's flat, it's kind of flattening out our gold trim down here. So I recommend just keeping your metal texture on normal and deleting the metal off of the gold trim. Yeah, and then you can start putting grunge on your trim and scratches as well. So we'll get in there, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start scratching it up. Now I'm gonna reverse this because I don't want the grunge on my trim right now. So I'm gonna go bring that back to normal. Oh, I'm gonna have to go all the way back. There we go. Unrasterize it. So we're gonna do a few things. Alright, so I'm gonna set this a new layer to overlay. I'm gonna select my lasso tool with C. It's also up here. You have your lasso tool, polygonal, magnetic. And I'm just going to do some scratches. And you don't have to be precise. I'm going to scratch up the edges here. And do some scratches across. Now if you don't like this metal texture, you can always just use like a flat gray and then build up the grunge yourself and add all the scratches yourself. Like that's totally fine. I just like using that. So you notice it's not getting applied to the stroke, the gold trim. And that's because, say if I were to put I don't know exactly how to explain this, but if I put a color overlay, it kind of overrides any attached layers. So the stroke is technically a color overlay, so anything you attach and pop on top of it is not going to be applied to this stroke or any area that has a color overlay. So let's just quickly scratch up my edges here. You don't have to be super precise. Let's do some scratches across it, thin them out a bit. Yeah. Make this a little thinner. Okay, so now we've got this scratched up button. And that didn't take long at all. You can add some little fragment pieces around if you feel like it. Okay. So now we got our scratched up button with this gold trim. And we are going to start adding notches like you see over here. Okay. Now in order to add those notches, I'm going to do a little switcheroony. So give me 1 second while I set this up. Gotta make sure I remember the proper order. Okay. And if your scratches are too bright, you can just lower the opacity of them. Alright. I'm going to duplicate this oval. Yeah. So actually I'm going to take this whole layer, I'm going to pop it in a group. Gold button. Save that. And then I'm going to merge some layers. Rasterize layer style. Whoopsie. Oh. There we go. Take the stroke off this one. I remember what I'm doing. Okay. Gold button, no stroke. Gold button with stroke. So, merge loop. All I did was I made okay. So I made 2 copies, and for one, the bottom one, I took off the gold stroke, and the top one I left it on. And I'm going to reduce the opacity of the gold stroke one a bit. I want to add some grunge to it. Not much grunge, just a little. Just to show we got some. Alright. Yeah. So let's add some notches. So we're going to create another layer on top here. Well, first I made these 2 copies. Now I'm going to erase some of the gold trim. And these are also going to be the places where I put my notches. So remember, on the bottom I have one without the gold trim, and then one on top I have a collapsed one with the gold trim. And I'm erasing gold trim. Oops. I made one mistake. Hold on. I forgot to turn off the shadow on the gold trim. You only want the bottom layer to have the shadow effect on. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to turn off the drop shadow and outer glow. So the only one that has it now is this bottom layer. And I'm going to, save a legacy copy, gold button, just in case I screw something up. It's always good to create copies. I'm going to merge this one. Now I'm going to start deleting stuff. And now it's not going to mess with the shadow. So we just kind of scratch it up and do little notches cut out of it. Right. Again, you do not need to be precise when it comes to metal because it's random how these scratches are coming up. But there's also kind of a scratch language, meaning things usually get, areas that are raised get scratched more than areas that are receded because they're getting rubbed against the elements and people moving it around and stuff like that. So edges get scratched a lot. You know, this main surface will be scratched more than, say, this outer surface. Typically, I mean, not exclusively. Okay, so I probably won't do this whole thing. Just some parts to get the technique going. Okay, so we're starting to see this wear coming together. Sometimes it's good to take out like a whole chunk and really beat it up. That's too much. Okay, and a couple more over here. Alright, we're going to work with that. Now, we're going to create another layer on top here. And we're going to set it to, actually, we're just going to keep it normal. We're going to put it down to 50%, maybe lower it. And this is how we're going to make our notches. So notches really just consist of black and white. So if your light source is at the top, the white's going to be on the bottom, and black's going to be on the top. You see how zoomed out it makes a notch. When you zoom in all the way, it's a little different. That one's really big, so it looks kind of ugly, but if you want to blend it more, you can set it to overlay, which will work with, overlay works with kind of like the lighting and the texture that's already on the thing you're applying it to. So it's nice. I use overlay a lot. What am I doing here? Okay. So this one, this edge here is going to be white. Now one problem with overlay is whites don't come across as dramatic. So I set my opacity to 30 so it blends a bit more. Actually, that's creating some issues. So I'm going to create another layer. One's going to be for white, one's going to be for black. Now I can have them set at different opacities. So this black one, create a lip here. And the black you can set to overlay, and the white you can just set to normal. Lower the opacity a bit. Alright, so go back to my white. Different notches like this. It's going to be white underlayer, and then a black top layer. Oh, I still have white selected. There we go. You start to get some good notches going. So I'll go to the white. Increase my white a bit. Yeah. And my black. A notch. And if say I want to add a notch to this big one right here, since it's already white, I just have to put black on top of it in certain parts. And it's gonna go along. So it's gonna look like I cut into this metal instead of just scratching it. See how that works out? So now it's got this deep gash. Another way to create gashes, I'm going to create a new layer to illustrate this. Set your color to, I don't know, let's say gray. Create a gash right there. And then I'm going to bevel and emboss it. And then I'm going to flip it to be on the right. So now you see it's coming out because the shadow's on the bottom and the white's on the top. We want the white on top and the shadow on the bottom. So all I'm going to do is switch my light down to the bottom, and now it looks like a gash. And I can increase my highlight so it's brighter and my shadow so it's darker. I can set this layer to overlay so it merges more, and then if I want some gashes, all I have to do, now it's going to work with the color, so this is not getting rid of the gold, and we want it to, so we want to do it on places where the gold's already cut off. So this is using the bevel emboss may not always work, but in some cases it will. And so like down here, bevel emboss is not working well. All right there. So it's okay for some effects. More for this flat surface, the bevel and emboss works. Right? Let's get rid of this one. But for other ones, for stuff more on the side, you're going to want to do your own, really. So, a few techniques you can try there. One's by hand, one's using layer styles. Let's get a lip on this right there. So it looks like it's cut in. Right, and I'm going to put some wear on this gold. I'm just like lightly erasing parts of it, and you can even scratch it up and then use your eraser on those parts. Yeah, and so there we've made this scratched up metal with a gold overlay using two different techniques. So one would be doing it by hand, and the other is doing it with a bevel and emboss layer style. So I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial and that it helps you with your work a little bit, whatever you might be doing. And yeah, thank you for watching.